Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's program. We're so excited here at the Bethel Public Library to have you join us. Today we have two very special guests. We have Susan Shapiro Barash and also Dianne Parrish, and they're going to be talking about a book called Estranged, how strained female friendships are mended or sorry, I talked too fast and I ran out. Um, are mended or ended. Sorry. So we have Susan Shapiro here with us. Susan has written more than a dozen nonfiction books, including Tripping the Prom Queen, Toxic Friends, and You're Grounded Forever. But first, let's go shopping. For more than 20 years, she taught gender studies at Marymount Manhattan College and has guest taught creative nonfiction at the Writing Institute at Sarah Lawrence College. Her fiction is published under her pen name, Susanna Marin. And then we also have Dianne Parrish with us. And Dianne has always been a fiction writer, but for most of her life, no one knew that. A former dental hygienist who became a litigation attorney and then a board member for nonprofits, she wrote her debut novel, Something Better, on the Lowdown. After Hours, um, and kept its existence a secret for years. Dianne is grateful that when Something Better was finally published, it was well received, winning a Literary Titan Book Award, an American Legacy Book Award, a Firebird Prize, and the Pacific Book Award's first place prize for women's fiction. Ms. Parrish's essays and short fiction have been published in journals such as Cala Press Literary Journal, Vita Brevis, the National Gardener, and the Raven's Perch. She is originally from the Midwest, lived for a time in Switzerland, and now makes her home with her husband in Connecticut, where they raise two children and still tend their elderly corgi. So after our program, I encourage you all to sign up for our summer reading program. And I also have a survey just asking about how you enjoyed the program. And I'll be sending out that link at the end. And without further ado, I'll hand it off to our hosts.
Thank you, Bailey.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Susan, I'm really looking forward to our conversation about your book. I'm impressed that you've written, this is what, number 17?
Number 18.
Number 18, wow. So I know that you have spent your career investigating how women are positioned in contemporary culture. You've covered that topic, and I'm wondering, why did you choose to write this particular book right now?
So, Dianne, 7.5 years ago, my mother died. And when she died, I realized who was really there for me among my closest friends and who surprisingly was not. And I told my agent and my publisher that I wanted to do this book, but I was then writing fiction and I was under contract to write a few novels under my pen name, as Bailey said, Susanna Marin. So I interviewed 25 women for this book out of the 150, because for my nonfiction, I interviewed between 150 and 200 women. And then I had to put this project aside. So when I came back to it a few years ago, after handing in the novels and having them published, everything had changed. And women who said that, women of all ages, I spoke to a very diverse group of women across the country from the ages of 20 to 80. And they were telling me that they, or initially 7.5 years ago, they were saying that they wanted to leave a very unhappy female friendship, but didn't feel that they could, to women saying, you know what, I now can leave a friendship that isn't working anymore despite our history, and I'm doing better because of it. So women being worried that they had failed, to women saying this is a positive step.
Mm-hmm. You've also spent a lot of time doing your own studies about women's relationships, women's place in fiction. How was this book informed by the studies that you yourself have undertaken?
Well, I've always written and investigated women in contemporary American society, because I think it's really very hard for us to get through. We live in a very patriarchal culture. We live and we die in a patriarchy, and it really makes women struggle in many ways. And despite, maybe great financial success or personal success, or getting all of our dreams and goals met, it's still very hard for women. So to that end, I did 3 different studies on the role of wife in contemporary America. And I wrote a book on sisters and a book on mothers and daughters that Bailey mentioned, a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law book, a book on female rivalry that she mentioned called Tripping the Prom Queen, always looking to see how women really feel versus the faces that we wear.
Mm-hmm. By the way, that is a fabulous title, Tripping the Prom Queen.
Thank
And also, I love the one, you're grounded, now let's go shopping. That's whatever.
You're grounded forever, but first let's go shopping. Yeah, exactly what we do as mothers. I talked to mothers who had daughters 3 years old to over 30 years old for that book.
Oh, wow. So how did you find the women for this book?
Well, for this book, I found them online by posting an ad online, but I started so long ago that in the early 90s, when my first book came out, I used to advertise in newspapers across the country and beg cousins and friends across the country to post ads in like women's gyms and Y's. And then I would network. So times have changed, and I found the women online, and I conducted phone interviews, and all identifying characteristics are changed in all of my books. Every part of it, the name, where you live, what your work is, so that you're not identifiable.
Mm-hmm. So you were speaking with these women on the phone. Did you need to interview each person more than once, or did you have some of these? You got a lot of information, so you must have been on the phone with some of these people a long time.
For weeks and weeks. There was only there at the so let me just interrupt us to explain. The book, out of the 150 women interviewed for this book / study, per chapter, I have a long interview that is both sides. She said, she said. So the ex-friends actually both explained what happened to them. And in that case, I ended up talking to them for more than one phone call, for sure, because those are much more in-depth, interviews.
Mm-hmm. So when you had to go back, did you share with one of the she's what the other she said, or did you keep that?
No, that I didn't do. But the one thing I do in this interview process is I always read back the entire interview to the interviewee and make sure that she approves of everything.
Okay. That must, yeah, that's a very thorough process. I'm
It
impressed.
really is. But I think that how women really feel and how we get through is endlessly fascinating. I could listen to these women like all the time.
You should be a psychologist. Are you a psychologist?
I'm a my graduate degree is in writing, but all the years, the 24 years I taught at Marymount Manhattan, the writing department was set up as critical thinking. So each professor had her own topic, and my topic was gender. So sometimes I'm described as a gender expert, but the point is that this book and all my nonfiction is written from the point of view of sort of, gender and, really delving into women's lives.
Mm-hmm. So in this book, you spoke with women, I think, as young as early 20s, all the way up until the 80s. What were the consistencies across age groups, and what were the things that either fell away or popped up as women went through life?
Well, these riffs with our best friends really start early in our lives. I mean, you can have tension with a friend in grade school, and yet we crave these friendships. We really want to be connected to other females and to be understood, supported, to feel it's really safe. So what was so curious is that as we age, we tend to still have the same yearnings and hopes with, our best friend. And do we learn? Well, women reinvent themselves. Longevity is a big part of this story because we reinvent ourselves at different stages and phases of our lives. So, young women are trying to achieve in the workplace, earn a graduate degree in many cases. Some choose to marry, some choose not to. Some have children, some don't. But whatever it is, we like to mirror our friends. So we are looking at friends who have very similar experience at the same time. And then sometimes we grow apart. And by the way, this book is not about growing apart and then maybe getting reunited and being happy. This is about a real friend breakup, one that causes great heartache and disappointment, and yet we're able to do it probably for the best. That's the whole idea here. So in different decades of our lives, what's so interesting is that women love to make new friends. We love to be very close and to experience a lot of things together. And we're very hurt again and again. It's almost as if we don't learn.
The craving is so deep and so profound, I think. Yeah. That didn't change no matter how old the women were, really, right?
Well, what women were saying to me is, our children grew up together and we've stayed friends, but her values aren't mine. And in the book, I have, different chapters that were the result of my research. And for the friend, I have this chapter that I don't think would have existed if maybe 12 years ago. And it's about having different values, where our values are no longer the same. So I interviewed women who said that they no longer spoke to a friend over their politics. And I don't think we saw that before, where it was such a divisive thing that you would stop talking. And then also a lot of young women talked about their children being vaccinated, their best friend didn't believe in it, and it caused a real rift. And so everything is much more, a line in the sand now than in the past.
Yeah, did that surprise you when you discovered that was the case?
I was surprised at how much it was a deal breaker. In the past, it wasn't like you either think as I do or we're no longer friends. And that's what was happening in that chapter. But I also, I have a chapter called The Faithless Friend, where you and the friend are so close, and then a third party enters the equation. Maybe one of you is dating someone new at any age, or maybe you have a new friend and you bring her into the dyad, this twosome, and it just shakes it up completely. So there's a lot of, tension in these friendships.
Tension and almost a kind of possessiveness, similar to a male-female couple almost.
Yeah, well, actually 75% of the women with whom I spoke said that they would find it easier to break up with a romantic partner than to break up with their best friend, even if it was time to break up.
Yeah, doesn't really surprise me. So, what else in your interviews with these women stood out to you as something you didn't anticipate discovering?
That I didn't expect?
You didn't expect, right?
I didn't expect so much betrayal.
Oh.
What women really talked about, and I know that your novel's about forgiveness, so it's sort of I love your novel, so it's sort of interesting that we're talking about this. Women get so close to their best friend, they confide their secrets, they reveal their feelings. And then if the friend does something that feels so egregious that the friendship breaks up, they feel that they can never forgive that friend. And so there's a lot of betrayal. Betrayal, the most common, and we all know it, but nonetheless, it was really reported to me repeatedly in this book, is a friend, it's called The Thieving Friend, and that's one of the chapters. And in this chapter, friends are stealing either an idea of your best work friend, or they steal, your ex boyfriend or husband, that feels like a betrayal, even if it's an ex, or a present partner. A lot of younger women talked about that. And then women who were widowed or divorced or just empty nesters talked about feeling betrayed by a friend, not included, not respected, that the friend had made new friends, all of these reasons that the friendship is no longer what was so important anymore.
That's really interesting. I'm just thinking as you're talking, my 10-year-old granddaughter had a situation in school this year with a thieving friend who took her project idea and claimed it as
Exactly.
and it was so traumatic for these girls. They're only 10 years old.
And it really happens. It starts early and it ends possibly never.
Never ends.
And yeah, well, what friends what friends do that's unforgivable, there's that word again, forgiveness, becomes almost an inciting incident. So there are two ways that these friendships break up. Either the friend does something so shocking, similar to what your granddaughter experienced, but on an adult level, and steals something that's important. I mean, one interviewee told me that she was so close to her best friend's daughter, she had no children of her own, that it had become it had made a wedge in their friendship. So really overstepping boundaries, but something that is just an inciting incident, or it's cumulative. We just have had so much go on with this friend that we finally say to ourselves, I don't think I can do this another day. And what am I getting from this versus what I'm giving? So, women really waking up and looking at this friendship and understanding there's an expiration date.
Which the idea of a breakup, I'm thinking from my own perspective, I'm very much conflict avoidance. And I'm thinking of the friends that I've left behind in my own life. I tended to just sort of sneak out the door and not ever have a confrontation. Do you think women are more confident now and more willing to have that confrontation and say why the friendship is ending? Or are we still so eager to please that that's a difficult thing to do?
Well, women really are willing to happy to avoid conflict or relieved to, versus having a confrontation. So I have a whole section in the book on ghosting. And while we associate ghosting with romantic relationships, Dianne, in fact, it's really happening in these friendships. And that's not easy to do. It's not easy to ghost someone when you've texted each other, 5 times a day, at least for the last 10, 20 years. And now it's no longer happening because the friendship is failing. So, it becomes really obvious that you're ghosting. And that's what women do. Several women talked about confronting the friend and really saying, we need to divorce. But this doesn't work anymore. But for the most part, that's not what women of all ages do. They just do a slow fade.
Yeah, that's been my experience being on, one side or the other of this situation.
Exactly.
So I don't know how much you want to reveal. We don't want to spoil everything about the book, but you describe 7 classic scenarios and how they affect us. I'm wondering, were those your categories that you created as a result of your research? And how would you describe how you came up with them, if that's the case?
After the 150 women were interviewed, and I did a questionnaire at the end for another 111 women who responded to my questionnaire, I realized that the categories were really the result of what the women had to say. So I mentioned the faithless friend, where a third party gets in the way, the thieving friend who steals your idea, or a person who is important to you. But I also, and of course, the friend with different values. But I also looked at something we all know all too well: the green-eyed friend, the friend who really is jealous. And in the end, it became too much in these friendships. And so, one of the two friends, the way it works is there's the estranger, the one who puts the estrangement into play and leaves. And there's the estrangee, who is the recipient at the other end. And then there's the flippant friend, the friend who doesn't really show enough respect. And women of all ages talked about how disheartening that was.
Yeah.
And how they felt like other friends and other chances were more important to the friend, and they were excluded until they finally just couldn't stand it anymore. So that's
one of the most painful experiences about being alive, I think, is to be excluded. Did you find that?
Yes, and women really were very upset when it happened. They talked about having poured their heart out to this friend, having put so much energy and care into it, and then the friend acted as if they didn't count. And sometimes, like, I remember one interviewee said to me that her friend canceled a date. That's not a good sign when your friend's always canceling. And anyway, she decided to just go to the mall, and there was the friend with her new friends.
Oh,
So yeah, that one, this is where we feel so betrayed. That's betrayal.
yeah, that's a special kind of cruel right there.
Mhm.
You also shared with us some sister stories, which is, again, a unique category in terms of women's relationships. How did you find that those sister stories were similar and different from the friends?
I wanted to do one sister story per chapter because even though this book is about female friendship, so many of the interviewees said to me, well, people thought we were sisters. We appeared to be like, we were like sisters. I was so close to her that I didn't even need to be in touch with my sister. Or I never had a sister, but this friend is my sister. And so having written a book years ago, I had done a study and written a book called Sisters Devoted or Divided. I said to my editor, I would like to hear what one sister has to say about a breakup with her sister or sisters to compare it. And what I found is that with our sisters, if we're lucky enough to have a sister, we have our mother and the family expectation hovering over us. Whereas with a friend, it is all about choice. There's no, family that expects that you will be close, but you choose the friend. And so, in fact, we become fictive family. And in the book, besides the interviews, I do a lot of research and I also look at pop culture. So, a good example of a fictive family would be for those of us who watched Sex in the City for years, and now the new one, which is called And Just Like That. In those stories, episodes, the women are the family to each other, and there are really no family members. It's all about the friendship. And so that's what women were saying, this group of friends were like family to each other. And with the sisters, they all mentioned their mother. Some of them said, I know my mother is very disappointed. Even women in their 50s or 60s and younger women, but my sister and I don't talk anymore.
Yeah.
Which it's really sad, but again, something's really created that situation.
Yes. I don't know. You have done the research, but I'm surprised by how many people I know personally who have an estrangement with a sister. It seems fairly common to me.
Yeah, it's very common. When I pitched this book to my publisher and editor, I said, look, there have been a lot of books and I've looked at them and they're taught in sociology classes often. I've looked at books on family estrangement and studies, and a lot of it has to do with adult siblings. A lot of that research yields that adult siblings are often estranged. And it's very painful. We're taught, most of us, the societal message is that family is everything and family will always be there. And yet it happens. It really does happen. And the stories I found were really quite something.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think, I mean, some friendships seemed almost destined from the beginning to have an expiration date. You know, it's there, people are thrown together because of a unique set of circumstances. And if you were an outside observer looking at it, you'd think, how are those two? But the people involved just can't imagine that that's the case. Why do you think it's hard for women to imagine this friendship is only going, this is for a period of time and then it's going away?
Well, there's a societal message that we're best friends forever, BFFs. And we'd like to believe it. The women often said to me, look, I have this friend and I expect a great deal from her. We hold the bar very high, women when it comes to our interpersonal relationships. But I would say if life is a pie for women, that our closest female friends are a big piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we feel like, if you have children, they grow up, they, come into this world needing you, and then eventually they're spun out on their own, and spouses come and go, and the divorce rate, widowhood. But the best female friend is just expected to always be there. And that's why it's so complicated to estrange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. So what do you think, based on your research, what would you say? I know you mentioned the thieving friend, the green-eyed friend. What would you say is are the top three reasons that female friendships end in estrangement? If you had to pick three.
But we talked about betrayal, all kinds of betrayal, and what that does. A breach of trust, which is a form of betrayal. A friend who, I have a few stories like this. In fact, one of the longer she said both sides, is about a secret that is revealed.
Oh,
The friend meant for her best friend to hold on to that secret and to honor it. And it created, no spoiler here, but it created quite an effect as a result. So when that trust is broken, and then the friend who really has never listened to you, and you feel like it's very one-sided,
mm-hmm.
where the energy is not shared, is a very big deal too for women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are all pretty big.
Yeah.
Secret betrayal is, wow, that's a very difficult.
When I came upon this story, I don't want to say too much. I was really surprised. Sometimes, often, truth is stranger than fiction, and this definitely fell into that category. It was quite a story. But we are told repeatedly by the culture at large that our friendships will save us and be our support system, our fail-safe. And that's why it's so hard when a friendship fails. The excuses made, I mean, the women would cite these excuses. So we were in kindergarten together. We grew up in the same town. We're the same race and religion. Our mothers were friends. Our grandmothers were friends. We were roommates in college. Our husbands are still friends. Just lots of reasons why it needs to still work. And then acceptance, the realization and the acceptance that it can't. I'm here to say it's empowering to estrange, and we have healthier friendships on the other side of it from what we've learned. But I'm also here to say that it's a loss and there's a grieving process.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Do you find, I don't want to again reveal too much that's in the book, but have you found in your research that there's a certain type of estrangement that can end with both participants being in a healthier place at the end of the day? Or is it so individualized that you can't make a statement like that?
The person who's the estrangee, meaning she's at the receiving end of being estranged by the estranger, is often really surprised and feels at a loss. And when we consider how much time and how many things we share time-wise with these friends, it's understandable. But several of the women said that upon reflection, they understood that this friendship probably had, as you said before, had reached the expiration date.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a process. And the idea that we'll be friends for always is a bit of a myth. It's really not the way real life works in so many instances.
Again, I'm speaking from my own experience, but as I've grown older, I approach new friendships differently. You know, when I was at a certain period, like when I was in college or when I was brand new at the law firm and there were other people with the same, who came at the same time, I was so eager to become friends with these people. And we just jumped into these friendships with those kinds of expectations. We're going to be friends forever. This is so fantastic. But now when I do try to make new friends, but I find I'm much more cautious. I definitely don't reveal my secrets. I definitely don't clear my calendar so that I'm always available. I mean, I tiptoe into friendships now. And I wonder, is that because I'm older, based on what you've learned, or is that because I learned something about female friendships along the way?
You sound very evolved. I think we do both. I do, as I said earlier, I was very surprised by how many women at at 60 described the same hope in their with their best friend or a circle of friends as they did at 30. And yet at there are also women who say I'm more self-aware and
Mhm.
I'm more guarded, which is what you're saying.
Mhm.
But the one thing that we didn't talk about that I think is really important here is how much being in a group, which women like to do, and then two of the friends, what the very good friends or best friends, closest friends, in in this group, when there's a kind of breakup, how it affects the whole group, which I found really fascinating. Sometimes the whole group splinters, and
Mhm.
sometimes the group takes sides, and other times the estranger and the estrangee are both very worried about not being included in the group anymore.
Yeah,
It
that's
feels like a big risk to them. So that's another consideration, as to why women don't leave an unhealthy friendship sometimes, because they just don't, when women like to belong and they don't want to jeopardize that position.
yeah. And that's not just true. And I mean, what comes to mind immediately is maybe a sorority or something like that. But women do, you're right, women do tend to form groups over the course of our lifetime.
I interviewed a woman who was maybe 60, and she and her husband moved to a retirement community, and everyone was so friendly, and they were invited to dinner, and all these new couples, and the men liked each other and the women liked each other. And for the first time, she and her husband were working and they were so happy. And then he died unexpectedly. And she thought, well, I'll still stay friends. But the women who were still part of a couple, they invited her one time, like for dinner after, and then they sort of let her go. So she joined the single women's group, which was made up of divorcees and widows. And they, the message was, look, there are enough of us and we don't really welcome you. And she felt really alone. And my life's work is about how women can only do well if we really embrace each other, if we have authentic relationships, and if we support each other. It doesn't mean that a best friendship isn't rocky or doesn't work, but in general, the idea of someone new in a community being shunned really once her status changes is pretty disturbing.
Mm-hmm. But I have heard that before from people who were divorced, that all of a sudden all their couple friendships went away, and the women who were part of that couple didn't really make an effort to
Yeah,
stay.
it's very common, and I think that it actually is informed by a way that we're all taught to think as females in America. And I look at it in my book, Tripping the Prom Queen, which is about female rivalry. We are all raised by our families, by society, by the culture to think that we live in, women exist, our daughters, our granddaughters, in a limited goods society, meaning that there's not enough pie. So somehow if your friend gets something wonderful, there's no room for you to get it. And we have to stop thinking that there's not enough experience to go around, or we'll always be competing for
Mm-hmm.
the glittering goods and, all the glittering prizes. And that's what that woman was really describing. This sense coming from the other women that that they already had enough, and that their chances would be diminished by too many females, and that's not a good way. We have to stop thinking that way.
Yeah, most definitely. Susan, before we go to Q&A, I wonder what else would you like to share with the group about the book that I haven't thought to ask you?
Oh, just that this study was really fascinating to me. I looked at famous women friends, so I'll just mention a few of them. Marilyn Monroe and Ella Fitzgerald were very close friends, and the friendship always suffered because of Marilyn Monroe's drug use and drinking. And actually I have a chapter in the book that I didn't mention about the wayward friend, where one friend has some kind of addiction and the other friend is really the enabler. And that was really something to look at, because the feelings are very pure, but the situation is very fraught. So I looked at that. I looked at some famous sisters. So I looked at Jackie Kennedy and Lee Radswell, her sister, and that we all know what happened. That's historical. Talk about sisters who were competitive. I mean, Lee Radswell thought she was going to marry Onassis until her sister was widowed, and it was just too intriguing to Onassis. So Lee lost out, very triangulated situation, and Jackie stepped in. So, and then I look at, younger women, and well, most recently I read that Blake Lively was, I guess, what would the verb be, ditched, no longer Taylor Swift's friend because of all that's going on over Gossip Girls. So that's looking at a much younger generation. But Liz Taylor was widowed and then nabbed her best friend Debbie Reynolds' husband during her grief. So, I look at famous women and at how we all look at that. I look at how women are set up to compete in so many instances and what it does to friendships.
Yeah. Well, grief makes us crazy, but that's really crazy.
So the research was really fascinating. One other thing, and then we should open up to questions if anyone has any, is the social anthropologist Margaret Mead, whose work I so admire. She was once interviewed about her work and her life, and the reporter said, well, how do you feel about your 3 failed marriages? And she said, women need to understand that marriage is terminable. And I think that that's applicable to female friendships too. As we talked about expiration date, but the idea that we're taught that everything good lasts forever, and it's very heady stuff, but it also can prove very disappointing for us personally. So I guess, just the idea that we can estrange from really unhealthy friendships, and that's even if they started on a high note, and that's really what this book is about.
A form of liberation, maybe.
Yes, and the one thing that my editor really wanted was not just an investigation into this, but she also wanted me to have some, you know, I guess advice at the end of each chapter, some
Mhm.
bullet points. And so I do that too per chapter, per type of female breakup.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Thank you.
So I'm happy to, Bailey, do you want me to be the facilitator for any questions, or do you want to be the person who does that? I'm happy to do it however you like.
So, I don't mind. Oh, sorry. I'm in the room with the Zoom, so there's a lot of echo.
Okay.
So I think that we can open up pretty easily with Q&A. If people want to unmute themselves and ask their questions, that's absolutely welcome. I will also have the chat feature up so I can let you know if anyone has a question that they wrote in the chat,
Okay.
if you would like to do it that way.
Either way is fine. And if, I don't know if there's anyone, if there were any walk-ins, but if there were any walk-ins with questions, you can let us know about that too.
Absolutely. I'll let you know if anyone has questions here.
Okay.
Do you
So
see any? I don't see how it's set up that way.
Yeah, no, I don't have anyone in here at the moment, so we should be good.
okay. Well, for anyone on the Zoom who would like to ask a question or discuss something that this discussion raised for you, just unmute yourself, and if you want to, put your hand up and I'll call on you.
Well, I have a question, but because a lot of people are on without video, I can't really ask the question. I'd be so curious how many of the women attending have ever had a breakup with a female friend, and how did it turn out?
Mm-hmm. Well, I did. I've had several.
What I have too, and actually, um, when I was writing the book, the publisher and my editor wanted me to include one of my own stories to kind of thread it through the book. It's not primary, but it comes and goes through the book. It took me a very long time to realize this friend wasn't really there for me. And we'd grown up together. So it was very hard to let go.
Was it hard to write about that?
Yes, it was hard because it was, excuse me, so personal.
Mm-hmm.
But I really felt like I needed this book. I mean, I needed to write it and read it. You know, there's that famous quote from Toni Morrison, where I'm going to paraphrase it, where she said something like, if there's a book you need to read and it isn't written, you must write it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always felt like that about my nonfiction book. I mean, when I wrote that mother-in-law book, I had a mother-in-law that I really needed to understand better, and there was no book. And so that study was very interesting. And now today I'm a mother-in-law, but then I was a young daughter-in-law. So, I mean, this book, I just couldn't find anything about leaving a friendship and coming out on the other side better off.
Mm-hmm.
And so learning that from this very disparate group of women was really interesting.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've been on a book tour and people have come up to me and they've said, I'm so glad you wrote this, or I wait to hear my story. It just beats the band, you know, all sorts of things, or, you know, I'm just recovering, or I'm so happy now that I finally left the room, but really confessing, really, you know, talking about how they truly feel. How about you, Bailey? Did you ever have a breakup?
I did, and I was actually about to say that it's a very relatable problem to have. I feel like, especially in like, this culture where we do value female friendships so much. I actually recently broke up with a entire softball team
Oh.
because they got too competitive and were leaving me out of a lot of stuff, and it was extremely difficult, but it was a discussion that had to be had. And I'm hoping that, going forward, they're going to think a little bit about it. but it was definitely heartbreaking and it was hard, but we move forward and we find new passions and things like that. So that
Do you
was
feel relieved? Are you relieved that you didn't?
Yeah, I am really relieved because, it was one of those things where I was like, why am I dedicating all this time to be treated so horribly? I'm spending all this time and under like kind of like false pretenses of, oh, we can hang out after, we can hang out after, and then it just never would happen. And eventually I was talking to my husband one night and I was like, I just feel like so invisible. And he's like, then why are you sticking around? And I was like, you're so right. Why am I sticking around? And now I have time to actually to do the things I like and spend time with the friends who do value me. So,
You are a perfect example of how we learn and evolve and grow stronger
yeah,
for
absolutely.
taking those steps. That's exactly
Absolutely.
what women are saying. But you see, you really struggle with she's perfect, Diane, because this is exactly what women are saying, and they share a lot of different stories. I interviewed women, yours was baseball, softball.
Softball, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't done that, but I've talked to women in tennis leagues and bowling leagues. Um, Really very similar, where there's a leader and she's in
Hmm.
charge, and everyone kind of, kowtows to her, and you feel special if you get placed in a way that is, where you want to be. And if not, you feel really dissed and like you don't count, as you said, invisible. So
Exactly.
yeah, so it's really, yeah, very true what happens.
Hmm.
Oh,
Kathy?
here's a question from Kathy.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I find this conversation interesting. I'm 79 years old, and I realize that I've probably over the years learned how to move away. I live in a small town. I'm a Connecticut negative, but I live in a small town near New Milford. And for the first 25 years, before I went back to college, I went back to college as a non-traditional student. I was involved, and we had neighborhood friends. But it's a neighborhood that over the years people kind of moved away. So it wasn't like, a heartbreak friendship. And then especially once I went back to school and then I got into marketing, which had me traveling all over the country, then I didn't have time. I had work associates, we would go out for drinks after work, or we would go out to lunch, or some of us would even go down and see Broadway shows. So I guess in a way I feel kind of fortunate. And I think as you get older, at least I found as you get older, that when you do feel that you have a friend or something and you feel disappointed, you've already learned how to walk away without letting it destroy you. I could see it happening if it happened to me when I was younger. And my husband and I were very close. But one of the things that you made a comment that's so true, for my husband passed away 9 years ago. And the one thing I found, and I'm happy, I belong to a small church now. And that the reason I stayed, to be quite honest with you, is to come in as a widow lady and have all the women welcome you who are still married. Because there were occasions where it wasn't even that I was with friends, it was just walking into a room and it's like, oh, where's your husband? I said, he's in an urn. I got to be, I had to have a sense of humor, because when it happened, I'd have to say, he's in an urn. Oh, and then they kind of scuttle their husbands away. I'm saying,
But you see, this
okay.
is so unfair. It's
Yeah, I
just
know.
unfair.
And it does. But I think for me, I guess maybe because of the type of work that I did and because I traveled a lot, I kind of learned to kind of like distance myself a little bit and
Mhm.
not count on. I do have a friend out in Colorado who we stayed in touch with over the years. We're the same age. We grew up in Ridgefield, Connecticut, and she's been out in Colorado for 60 years now. And we have known each other for over 70 years. We met when in first grade at 6 years old. And one of the things I did find, I haven't gone out the last couple of years, only because she doesn't like to leave her husband home alone more than a couple of hours. And it's been tough. But also one of the things I found was nothing that Merle said. It was more about, oh my God, just different views on things. So in a way, I was happy because she's like the supreme hostess. Won't let you pay for gas, won't let you do this or that. And we saw all the funky towns in Colorado. But because she's grown, lived in a different environment, you see those changes happen, you know? You have a certain view of the world in your neck of the woods. And then when you've lived somewhere else, you know, the views have changed so much. She's still a great person. And I certainly appreciate having me out there for like 6 years, because it was a great time. But I mean, I think the book is interesting, and I feel for women who have probably had a friendship since they were in their 20s and have actually lived within distance to be together. Because like I said with Merle, and actually there was another woman who passed away very early. We would at least write, you know, a few times a year, you know, but it wasn't the same. You know, they moved out of the area. So.
But the idea that one of the things that my beloved mother said to me the week before she died, one of the things she said to me was she couldn't believe I was still friends with one of my best friends who had voted for the opposite person I voted for. And she said to me, "Why would you do that?" And I said, "Because the friendship matters to me so much, and I need to look the other way on this." And she said to me, "I wouldn't." So, you know, when you describe this friend who's in a different part of the country and looks at the world differently, but you say she's still a great person, I think that's important too. But I'm just reporting that I couldn't believe that there were so many interviewees who said that their friends had different political beliefs and that it was a deal breaker. You know, that I was just so surprised. But I think someone else has a comment. Is it Linda? Did you? No, here?
No.
Oh, okay. But you know, to stay in touch with friends and to overlook things is, of course, a virtue, if we can. So if there are no other questions, I guess we can wrap it up. Bailey, why don't you tell our attendees what Dianne and I are doing?
All righty. So, Dianne and Susan are being very generous, and they're going to be giving away 2 copies of their book, of Susan's book, their book, and that is going to be through our library. We're going to be contacting you if you won after the program is over, so you can come pick it up here at the library, and we'll have it ready for you.
So Dianne's book.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Also, so Dianne is donating 2 of her novels, and I'm
That's right.
2 copies of Estranged. Of
Yes.
her, and her novel is Something Better.
Something Better. There we go. Something Better and Estranged. So 2 copies of each. That's going to be very nice. I'm so excited about that. That's going to be awesome. So we are very grateful for that. And we're so grateful that you both took the time out of your day to have this wonderful program with us. Yeah, I hope you have
Thank you, everyone. And Bailey, thank you for arranging it. Dianne, thank you for interviewing me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bethel Library and Bailey and everyone who attended. It was wonderful.
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.